I thought I knew everything about my children until a plumber made a discovery that changed everything while renovating my bathroom. The contractor came upstairs pale as a ghost. "Mrs. Walsh," he whispered, "grab your things and leave immediately. Don't tell your kids. For 30 years, I lived in the same house in Medford, the same basement where I did laundry every week. But behind that familiar concrete wall, there was a secret I never could have imagined. Sometimes the people you trust most are the ones you should fear the most." I thought I knew my children until the plumber discovered the basement. You know how it is when you've lived somewhere for so long that you think you know every inch, every secret, every sound the house makes when the wind picks up at night. My name is Eleanor. And honey, let me tell you, at 68 years old, I thought I'd seen everything life could throw at me. I've been rattling around this 3-bedroom colonial in Medford for 32 years now. Bought it back in '93 when the kids were still in middle school and the neighborhood was mostly young families with swing sets in every backyard. Michael and Sarah grew up in this house. First steps on these hardwood floors, height marks penciled on the kitchen door frame. Teenage arguments echoing through these same walls. Now they're both adults with their own places. Michael's got that fancy condo in Cambridge near Porter Square, and Sarah rents a cute little apartment in Somerville. Walking distance from the elementary school where she teaches 2nd grade, these October days have been absolutely gorgeous. I have to say, the maple tree outside my kitchen window is putting on quite a show, all reds and golds. Does that make you want to grab your camera every morning? There's something about New England autumns that gets into your bones, makes you want to nest. You know? Maybe that's why I finally decided to tackle the bathroom remodel I'd been putting off for 3 years. That upstairs bathroom. Oh my goodness. Avocado green tiles from 1974 that I swear were ugly even when they were fashionable. The medicine cabinet hung crooked no matter how many times I tried to adjust it. And don't get me started on the shower head that had about as much pressure as a leaky garden hose. I'd been saving up for my pension, putting away a little each month, until I finally had enough to do it right. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, lovely woman, been living next door for 15 years. She recommended Tony Marcelli. "Eleanor," she said over the fence while we were both raking leaves last weekend. "This man did my kitchen plumbing 2 years ago. Honest as the day is long. Shows up when he says he will. And his prices won't give you a heart attack." That was good enough for me when Tony knocked on my door that Tuesday morning. Toolbox in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other. I liked him immediately. Mid-50s work boots that had seen plenty of action. The kind of man who looks you in the eye when he shakes your hand. He had that slight Boston accent that makes you feel like you're talking to family. "Morning, Mrs. Walsh. Beautiful day for starting a project, isn't it?" I led him upstairs, pointing out everything that needed work. The leaky faucet that had been driving me crazy for months. The tile work that was starting to crack around the edges. The vanity that wobbled every time you leaned on it. He took notes on a small spiral pad, nodding and asking smart questions about water pressure and ventilation. "I'll need to check your main line downstairs first," he said, tucking the pad into his shirt pocket. "Make sure we've got good pressure and no issues with the foundation plumbing before we start tearing everything apart up here. Don't want any surprises once we're knee-deep in the project." That made perfect sense to me. Tony seemed thorough, professional. The kind of contractor who thinks ahead instead of just diving in and hoping for the best. He headed downstairs with his flashlight and a few tools while I stayed in the kitchen, making myself a second cup of coffee and mentally planning how I'd arrange things during the renovation. Maybe I'd finally organize that hall closet while the bathroom was out of commission. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. I started to wonder if he'd found some major problem. A burst pipe. Foundation issues. Something expensive that would eat into my budget. You know how your mind starts racing when a contractor takes longer than expected? But when Tony finally came back upstairs, it wasn't concern about plumbing that I saw on his face. It was fear. Real. Honest-to-God fear that made my coffee cup rattle against the saucer when I set it down. His face had drained of all color. Not just pale gray like someone had sucked the life right out of him. His hands were actually shaking as he set down his wrench on my kitchen counter. And when he looked at me, his eyes were wide with something I couldn't quite identify. "Mrs. Walsh," he said, and his voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "I need you to listen to me very carefully." My heart started doing this weird fluttering thing it does when I'm nervous. "What's wrong? Is it the pipes? Foundation damage?" "No, ma'am. Nothing like that." He kept glancing toward the basement door like something might come walking up those stairs. "I was checking your sump pump down in the corner, making sure everything's ready for the next big nor'easter. That's when I noticed the smell." "What kind of smell?" "Not the usual basement smell. That damp earth scent you get in these old foundations. Especially this time of year when the leaves are decomposing and the ground's holding more moisture." He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. Even though it wasn't particularly warm in the house, this was something chemical. Sweet, but wrong, if that makes sense. I nodded, though I wasn't sure it did make sense. Tony had been doing plumbing in this area for 25 years, according to Mrs. Chen. If he said a smell was wrong, I believed him. "I followed it toward the back corner behind your water heater. That's when things got ... He paused, looking around my kitchen like he was making sure we were alone. "Ma'am, there's equipment down there. Professional grade stuff. And documents. Lots of them. Equipment? In my basement. I'd lived in this house since the Clinton administration. I knew every box of Christmas decorations. Every piece of Michael's old hockey gear. Every paint can and garden tool stored down there. There was no equipment. Tony, I think you might be mistaken. There's nothing in my basement except storage and the usual utilities." He shook his head firmly. "Mrs. Walsh, I know what I saw, and I know what it means." His voice got even quieter. "I think you need to pack a bag and stay somewhere else tonight. And whatever you do, don't call your kids yet. Don't tell them I was here." While I was remodeling the bathroom, the plumber showed up pale and shaking. He whispered, "Grab your things and leave immediately. Don't tell your kids." I looked at the basement, trembling, grabbed my things, and left. The way Tony said those words, "Don't tell your kids," sent ice water through my veins. I mean, what could Michael and Sarah possibly have to do with whatever had spooked this man so badly? "Tony, you're scaring me." I set my coffee cup down because my hands were starting to shake too. "What exactly did you see down there?" He ran his hand through his graying hair and looked toward my front window, like he was checking to see if anyone was watching the house. "Mrs. Walsh, I've been doing this work for a long time. I've seen drug labs. I've seen illegal gambling setups. I've even stumbled across a guy who was running a fake ID operation out of his basement. But this ... double quotes," he trailed off, shaking his head. "This, what? This is bigger. More sophisticated. The kind of setup that takes serious money and serious know-how." He leaned against my kitchen counter, but I could tell he wanted to be anywhere but here. "There are computers down there. Not just one or two, I'm talking about a whole room full of server equipment. Professional installation, climate control, the works. It's a room full of computers. In my basement, that was impossible. I went down there at least once a week to do laundry, check the furnace filter, grab things from storage. How could there be a whole room I didn't know about? Tony, I think you might have gotten confused about which house you're in. This is 47 Hillside Avenue. Maybe you were supposed to check a basement at a different address." But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't right. He'd been working upstairs for an hour, had walked through my kitchen, knew exactly where he was. "Ma'am, I wish that was the case." He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo he'd taken. "Look at this." The image was dark and a little blurry, but I could make out what looked like blinking lights. Lots of them. Green and red and blue, like a Christmas tree made of electronic equipment. And in the background, I could see the familiar shape of my water heater. "Where exactly is this?" My voice sounded strange, like it was coming from someone else. "Behind your water heater. There's a section of the wall that's been removed and sealed back up. Professional job, you'd never notice it unless you were looking for it. But when I was checking the sump pump connections, I could hear humming coming from inside the wall. Humming. Electronics. Fans, hard drives, processors running hot. The kind of sound you get when you've got serious computing power. Running 24/7s. Tony tucked his phone back into his pocket. Mrs. Walsh, whoever set this up, they've been planning it for a long time. This isn't something you throw together over a weekend. I tried to process what he was telling me. Someone had built a secret room in my basement. Someone with access to my house. Someone who knew my routines well enough to do major construction without me noticing. How is that even possible? I would have heard drilling, sawing, people coming and going. Not if they did it when you weren't home. And not if they were smart about timing, working during the day when there's traffic noise, when neighbors are at work. Tony was warming to his explanation now, like he was trying to work it out himself. The electrical work alone would have taken weeks. They had to tap into your main panel, run dedicated circuits, install proper ventilation. My mind was racing. Over the past 2 years, there had been several times when I'd come home to find small things out of place. A basement light left on when I was sure I'd turned it off. Tools moved from where I'd left them. Once I found fresh tire tracks in my driveway that I couldn't account for. I'd chalked it all up to getting older, becoming more forgetful. Now I was wondering if someone had been using my house while I was out running errands or visiting Janet. Mrs. Walsh, there's something else. Tony's voice brought me back to the present. The documents I saw down there, some of them had official letterheads. Government agencies, banks, that kind of thing. And there were photos. What kind of photos? I couldn't get a good look, but they seemed to be surveillance photos. People going in and out of buildings, license plates, that sort of thing. The room started spinning a little. I grabbed the edge of the counter to steady myself. Tony, are you telling me someone's been running some kind of spy operation out of my basement? I don't know what they're running, but it's not legal, and it's not safe for you to be here. He picked up his toolbox. Ma'am, I'm going to leave now. I'm going to go home and think about what the right thing to do is. But you need to pack a bag and get out of here. Where am I supposed to go? You've got family? Someone your kids don't visit regular? The way he said it, your kids don't visit regular, made my stomach drop. Because Michael and Sarah did visit regularly. Michael stopped by at least twice a week, usually unannounced, claiming he was just checking on me. Sarah came by every Sunday for dinner. And sometimes during the week, if she was in the neighborhood, they both had keys to the house. Both knew my schedule better than anyone. Tony, you don't think? You can't possibly think my children are involved in this. But the look on his face told me that's exactly what he thought. Mrs. Walsh, I don't know who's involved, but I know professional work when I see it, and I know it takes money and access. Whoever did this has been in your house multiple times, knows your routines, and has the technical skills to pull off something this sophisticated. After Tony left, promising to call me later that evening, I stood in my kitchen staring at the basement door. The same door I'd walked through thousands of times over the years. The door that led to what I'd always thought was just storage, space, and utilities. Now it felt like the entrance to a stranger's house. I called my sister Janet in Brookline. Hey, it's Eleanor. Any chance I could stay over tonight? Having some work done on the bathroom and the water's going to be shut off? Course, honey. You know, you're always welcome. Should I pick up something for dinner? That would be wonderful. I'll be over around 5. I packed an overnight bag, my hands trembling as I folded pajamas and grabbed my toothbrush. The whole time I kept glancing toward the basement door, wondering what secrets were hidden behind that familiar white paint. Before leaving, I did something I'd never done in 30 years of living in this house. I stood at the top of the basement stairs and really listened. Tony was right. There was a humming sound. Faint, but definitely there. How had I never noticed it before? The afternoon light filtering through the small basement. Windows cast the same shadows it always had across the concrete floor. My washing machine sat in its usual spot. The furnace looked exactly the same, but now everything felt different. Like I was seeing it through a stranger's eyes. I grabbed my purse and car keys, locked the door behind me, and drove toward Brookline with more questions than answers rattling around in my head. Driving to Janet's, I took the scenic route through Davis Square, partly because I loved the way the old buildings looked this time of year, with the autumn light hitting them just right. And partly because I needed time to think. The sidewalks were busy with college students and young professionals grabbing coffee. And there was a street vendor selling apple cider and pumpkin donuts that made the whole area smell like fall. Normally, this drive relaxes me. Something comforting about familiar neighborhoods, the rhythm of traffic lights, the predictable chaos of Somerville streets. But today, every car behind me felt suspicious. Every turn seemed calculated. At a red light on Highland Avenue, I found myself checking my rearview mirror more than usual. There was a dark blue sedan 2 cars back. Nothing particularly noteworthy about it, except that I was pretty sure it had been behind me since I left Medford. When the light changed and I turned left onto Beacon Street, the sedan continued straight. "You're being paranoid, Eleanor," I said out loud. But my hands were still gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Janet's house is one of those classic Brookline colonials with a front porch that catches the afternoon sun perfectly. She was waiting for me with a glass of wine and that knowing look she gets when she can tell something's bothering me. "You look like you've seen a ghost, honey." "Maybe I have." I accepted the wine gratefully and sank into her comfortable living room chair. Janet had always been the practical one between us, 5 years younger and infinitely more organized. If anyone could help me make sense of this situation, it would be her. I told her about the bathroom remodel, about Tony's reaction, about the mysterious equipment he claimed to have found. I left out the part about him warning me not to tell Michael and Sarah I wasn't ready to go there yet, even in my own mind. "Eleanor, you've been in that house alone for too long." Sometimes contractors try to scare older women into expensive repairs they don't need. Maybe he's hoping you'll hire him for some big remediation project. But Janet hadn't seen Tony's face. She hadn't heard the genuine terror in his voice or seen the way his hands shook when he showed me that photo. "I don't think this is about money, Janet. I think someone really has been using my basement without my knowledge. But how is that possible? You're home most days. You would have heard construction noise, seen people coming and going." That was the question that had been nagging at me all afternoon. What if they only worked when I wasn't home? I go to the grocery store every Tuesday and Friday, have my hair appointment every other Thursday, book club the first Wednesday of each month. Janet refilled our wine glasses. Even so, that kind of construction would take months. Electrical work, ventilation, soundproofing. You can't do all that in a few hours here and there. What if it took years? The words came out before I'd fully formed the thought. What if someone's been slowly, carefully modifying my basement? Over a long period of time, we sat in silence for a moment, both of us thinking about the implications. Outside, the sun was setting earlier these days, casting long shadows across Janet's perfectly maintained garden. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Michael. Hey, Mom. How's the bathroom project going? Hope the contractor is working out." My blood went cold. I stared at the message for a full minute before showing it to Janet. "When did you tell him about the remodel?" she asked. "I didn't. We talked on Sunday about his work, about Sarah's teaching schedule, but I never mentioned the bathroom." I scrolled back through our recent conversations to make sure. Look, nothing about contractors or renovations. Janet frowned. Maybe Sarah mentioned it to him, but I didn't tell Sarah either. I only decided to do this last week, and I haven't talked to her since last Sunday's dinner. The implications were starting to sink in. How did Michael know about the bathroom project? How did he know I was working with a contractor? I typed back, "Going well so far? Still early in the process." His response came immediately. "Great. Let me know if you need any help with decisions. I could stop by this weekend to take a look." My hands were shaking again. "Janet, this is really strange. Michael never offers to help with house projects. Last year, when I wanted to paint the kitchen, he said he was too busy with work. Maybe he's just being thoughtful. But I could hear the doubt in her voice, too. We both knew Michael well enough to know that spontaneous offers of help weren't his style. My phone rang. Sarah's number. "Hi, sweetheart." "Mom, I was just thinking about you." "How are things going with the house project?" House project. I'd never mentioned any house project to Sarah either. "What house project?" There was a brief pause. "Oh, I thought. Didn't you say something about having some work done?" "When did I say that?" Another pause, longer this time. I must have misunderstood something. Do you know how it is? Sometimes I mix up conversations. She laughed, but it sounded forced. "Anyway, I was wondering if you'd like to have lunch tomorrow. It's a new place in Harvard Square I've been wanting to try." We made plans for lunch, but after I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah had been fishing for information. Both of my children somehow knew about work being done on my house, even though I hadn't told either of them. "Janet, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." "Of course. Have Michael or Sarah ever asked you about?" "My daily routines. When I go shopping, when I'm home alone, that sort of thing." Janet thought for a moment. "Not directly, but now that you mention it, Sarah did ask me a few months ago if you were still doing your grocery shopping on Tuesdays and Fridays. She said something about wanting to make sure you weren't carrying heavy bags when the weather was bad." "What did you tell her?" "It's just that, yes, you're pretty consistent about your schedule. You always have been." Janet's expression was growing more concerned. "Eleanor, what exactly are you thinking?" I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. Wasn't ready to voice the suspicion that was forming in my mind like a dark cloud on a sunny day. Instead, I helped Janet make dinner, a simple pasta with the butternut squash soup she'd been simmering all afternoon. We talked about safer topics, her book club, my neighbor Mrs. Chen's new grandchild, the beautiful fall weather we'd been having. But underneath the normal conversation, my mind kept circling back to Tony's warning. Don't tell your kids. What if he was right? What if the people I trusted most in the world were the ones I should trust least? I barely slept that night in Janet's guest room. Every time I started to drift off, I'd see Tony's terrified face or hear the echo of that humming sound from my basement. By 5 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep and made myself a cup of coffee in Janet's kitchen, watching the sunrise paint her backyard in shades of gold and amber. Janet found me there an hour later, still in my pajamas, staring out the window. "Rough night?" I keep thinking about what Tony said, about the computers, the documents, the professional installation. I turned to face my sister. "Janet, what if someone really has been using my house for something illegal?" She poured herself coffee and sat down across from me at the small breakfast table. "Then we call the police and let them handle it." "But what if ... I couldn't finish the sentence. What if what? What if it's Michael and Sarah? There, I'd said it out loud. The thought that had been gnawing at me all night. The possibility I didn't want to consider. Janet was quiet for a long moment. "Eleanor, those are your children. You raised them. They're good people with good jobs and normal lives, are they?" I thought about Michael's job at the investment firm, how vague he'd always been about exactly what he did there. About Sarah's teaching salary and how she could afford that nice apartment in Somerville. Plus the new car she'd bought last year. When's the last time either of them struggled financially? They're adults. They've built careers. Michael's been working at that same small firm for 8 years. But somehow he's driving a BMW and wearing $1,000 suits. Sarah's a public school teacher, but she goes on vacation to Europe every summer. I set down my coffee cup harder than necessary. When I was their age, I could barely afford groceries and rent, let alone luxury cars and international travel. Janet reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Times are different now. Maybe they're just better with money than we were. Or maybe they're getting money from somewhere else. We finished breakfast in relative silence, both lost in our own thoughts. I'd planned to meet Sarah for lunch at that new place in Harvard Square. But now the idea of sitting across from her and making small talk felt impossible. Around 10, I called Ray Kowalski. If there really was something hidden in my basement, I needed someone trustworthy to help me figure out what it was. Someone with no connection to Michael or Sarah. Okay? It's Eleanor Walsh from Hillside Avenue. I know this is going to sound strange, but I need a second opinion on something in my basement. Could you possibly stop by this afternoon? Sure thing, Mrs. Walsh. What kind of problem are we talking about? I'd rather explain when you get there. Would 3 o'clock work? After I hung up, I called Sarah to cancel lunch. I'm feeling a bit under the weather, sweetheart. Rain check. Of course, Mom. Is everything okay? You sound stressed. There it was again, that probing quality in her voice, like she was fishing for information. Just tired. I didn't sleep well last night. Well, take care of yourself. Call me if you need anything. I spent the rest of the morning at Janet's, helping her with some yard work and trying to act normal while my mind raced. At 2:30, I drove back to Medford, taking a different route this time and keeping an eye on my mirrors. The dark blue sedan wasn't there, but I noticed a gray pickup truck that seemed to be maintaining the same distance behind me for several miles. When I turned onto my street, it continued straight down the main road. Maybe I really was being paranoid. Or maybe I was finally paying attention to things I'd been unconsciously noticing for months. Ray's truck was already in my driveway when I pulled up. He was sitting on my front steps, checking something on his phone. Thanks for coming, Ray. I know this was short notice. No problem. I have to admit, I'm curious about what's got you so concerned. I led him around to the side entrance that goes directly to the basement, avoiding the main floor entirely. Before we go down there, I need to tell you what happened yesterday. I explained about Tony, about his reaction to whatever he'd found, about the equipment and documents he'd described. Ray listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious as I talked. And you haven't been down there since he told you this? I was too scared. Felt good to admit that. Ray, I've lived in this house for over 30 years. If there's a secret room in my basement, how is that possible? Let's go find out. The basement looked exactly the same as it always had. Concrete floor, exposed ceiling beams, the familiar collection of storage boxes and seasonal decorations. My washing machine hummed quietly in the corner, and the furnace kicked on as we stood there, just like it had thousands of times before. But Ray was already heading toward the back corner where Tony had been working. Mrs. Walsh, listen. I stood still and focused on the sounds around us. The furnace, the washing machine, and underneath it all, that faint electronic humming I'd noticed yesterday. That's not coming from any of your regular equipment, Ray said, pulling out a flashlight. And look at this. He was examining the wall behind my water heater, the same area Tony had photographed. In the bright beam of his flashlight, I could see what he was talking about. A section of the concrete wall that looked slightly different from the rest. The color was almost the same, but not quite. The texture was smooth where the original foundation was rougher. This has been patched, Ray said, running his hand along the seam. And recently, within the last couple of years, I'd say patched. You mean like covering a crack? No, this is bigger than a crack repair. This looks like someone removed a whole section of wall and then sealed it back up. He knelt down and examined the base of the wall. And look at these. There were small holes drilled into the concrete floor, each about the diameter of a quarter. They looked professional, precise, and they definitely hadn't been there when I moved into the house. Those are 4 cables, Ray said. Power, probably internet too. Someone's running serious infrastructure into whatever's behind this wall. My phone buzzed with another text from Michael. How's the house project coming along? Any major surprises with the old plumbing? I showed the message to Ray. Never told him about having plumbing work done. Ray studied the text, frowning. Mrs. Walsh, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Have your kids ever installed any kind of security system in your house? Cameras, smart doorbells, that sort of thing? I thought about it. Sarah insisted on that new programmable thermostat 2 years ago. Said it would save me money on heating costs. And Michael gave me a doorbell camera for Christmas last year. What about your phone? Do you use any apps that track your location? I don't think so. I'm not very good with technology. Someone doesn't have to be good with technology to have their technology monitored by someone else. Ray's expression was grim. Mrs. Walsh, I think we need to open this wall. The reality of what Ray was suggesting hit me like a physical blow. Opening the wall meant admitting that someone had been violating my home. It's my privacy, my sense of safety for who knows how long. It meant facing whatever secrets were hidden behind that carefully disguised concrete. What if we find something we wish we hadn't? Ray's voice was gentle but firm. Mrs. Walsh, whatever's back there, it's been operating in your basement without your knowledge. You have every right to know what's in your own home. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Danny, Ray Kowalski. I need you to bring the concrete saw over to Medford. Yeah, today if possible. It's important. While we waited for Danny, Ray walked me through the basement, pointing out details I'd never noticed. Several electrical circuits that didn't seem to connect to anything visible. A ventilation duct that didn't match the others in terms of age and installation quality. Most disturbing, a section of the floor near the mystery wall that sounded hollow when Ray tapped it with a screwdriver handle. There's a subfloor here, he said. Someone's created a raised platform, probably for cable management and climate control. Climate control. Whatever's behind that wall generates heat. Computers, servers, that kind of equipment needs to stay cool to function properly. Someone's put a lot of thought and money into this installation. I found myself thinking about all the times over the past few years when I'd come home to find the house slightly warmer than I'd left it, even when the thermostat hadn't changed. I'd always assumed it was just the quirks of an old heating system. Ray, how long would something like this take to install? Done right? With proper planning and working only when you weren't home. Could be done in stages over 6 months to a year. Maybe longer if they were being extra careful not to get caught. 6 months to a year. I thought about my routines, how predictable I'd become. Grocery shopping every Tuesday and Friday morning. Hair appointments every other Thursday. Book club the first Wednesday of each month. And of course, my regular visits to Janet's house, usually lasting several hours. Anyone who knew my schedule well enough could have planned around it. Donnie arrived with a small concrete saw and safety equipment. He was a man of few words, but Ray had obviously briefed him on the situation because he got to work immediately, cutting a neat rectangular opening in the newer section of wall. The first thing that hit us was the smell Tony had described. Not unpleasant exactly, but definitely chemical, like the air in an electronics store. But stronger. The second thing was the soft whoosh of cool air flowing out through the opening. Climate control, just as Ray had predicted. But it was the third thing that made my knees go weak. The space behind the wall was much larger than I'd expected. At least 8 feet by 12 feet, and it was packed with equipment I didn't recognize. Server racks lined to walls, their surfaces covered with blinking LED lights in green, red, and blue. Multiple computer monitors displayed scrolling data that meant nothing to me. The whole setup was clean, organized, and obviously expensive. Jesus Christ, Danny whispered. Ray squeezed through the opening first, his flashlight beam dancing across surfaces that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Mrs. Walsh, there's a whole office set up back here. I followed him through the opening, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The hidden room had carpeted floors, finished walls, and even a small desk with a comfortable-looking office chair. Papers were stacked neatly on the desk surface, and a high-end laptop sat closed but ready for use. Ray picked up one of the documents from the desk. Mrs. Walsh, you need to see this. It was a bank statement. Michael's name at the top, but not from the small investment firm where he supposedly worked. This was from a major international bank. And the balance made me grab the edge of the desk for support. $1.2 million in a checking account. There's more, Ray said quietly, handing me another paper. This one was a wire transfer receipt. Someone had moved $200,000 from an account I didn't recognize to Michael's international account. The date was 3 weeks ago, and this, a business license application. Sarah's name as the applicant, but not for teaching services. For something called educational consulting and data management. My legs gave out and I sank into the office chair, papers scattered across my lap. These weren't the children I thought I knew. These weren't the struggling young adults who occasionally needed their mother's financial help or emotional support. Mrs. Walsh, there's a whole filing cabinet back here. Danny called from the far corner of the room. Looks like years' worth of records. I couldn't move, couldn't process what I was seeing. The elaborate setup, the expensive equipment, the evidence of financial activities that had nothing to do with Michael's investment firm job or Sarah's teaching career. Ray was examining the computer equipment. This is sophisticated stuff. Industrial-grade servers, encrypted hard drives, satellite internet connections. Whoever set this up knew exactly what they were doing. What do you think they're using it for? Could be anything. Financial fraud, cryptocurrency, mining, data theft, identity manipulation. Ray's voice was grim. But whatever it is, it's big business. You don't invest this kind of money and effort in a hobby. My phone rang. Michael's number. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, unable to decide whether to answer. Finally, Ray nodded encouragingly. Hello, sweetheart. Mom, I've been thinking about your house project. Maybe I should come over tonight and take a look at what the contractor's doing. Make sure everything's up to code. Up to code. My son wanted to make sure illegal equipment hidden in my basement was up to code. That's not necessary, Michael. Everything's going fine. I insist. I'll bring dinner from that Italian place you like. We can make an evening of it. The casual manipulation in his voice was something I'd never noticed before. How many times had he insisted on something that seemed caring but was really about maintaining control? Actually, I'm not going to be home tonight. A pause. Where will you be? The question was asked lightly, but there was an edge to it that made my stomach clench. I'm staying at Janet's again. The house is still a mess from the construction. Another pause, longer this time. Okay, well, maybe tomorrow then. After I hung up, Ray was looking at me with concern. Mrs. Walsh, I think you should call the police. Not yet. My voice sounded stronger than I felt. I need to understand what they're doing first. I need to hear it from them. That could be dangerous. They're my children. But even as I said it, I was beginning to wonder if I really knew who my children were at all. Ray and Danny spent another hour photographing everything in the hidden room while I sat in that office chair, trying to make sense of the papers scattered across the desk. Bank statements, wire transfer receipts. What looked like client lists with dollar amounts that made my head spin. One document in particular caught my attention. It was a contract of some kind signed by both Michael and Sarah for something called Overseas Investment Facilitation Services. The contract was dated 18 months ago, and it outlined a business partnership worth several $1 million. Look at this. He examined the contract over my shoulder. This is a shell company setup. They're moving money through fake businesses to hide the source and destination of funds. Is that illegal? Depends on where the money's coming from and where it's going. But the level of secrecy suggests they're not doing anything they want the IRS or FBI to know about. I found another stack of papers that made my blood run cold. They were surveillance reports on various people, complete with photographs, daily schedules, and detailed financial information. The kind of intelligence you'd gather if you were planning to target someone for fraud or theft. Danny, we need to call this in, Ray said quietly. But Danny was examining something else he'd found. Ray, you should see this. He'd discovered a hidden safe built into the back wall of the secret room. It was open, revealing stacks of cash, multiple passports, and what looked like fake identification documents. I picked up one of the passports. Michael's photo, but the name was David Richardson, and the country of origin was listed as Canada. Sarah's fake passport identified her as Jennifer Mills from the United Kingdom. They have escape plans, I whispered. Ray nodded grimly. Mrs. Walsh, this is way beyond anything local police can handle. This is federal-level financial crime, possibly international money laundering. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Mom, Michael said you're staying at Aunt Janet's again tonight. Is everything okay with the house? Do you need help with anything? How did she know I was staying at Janet's? I'd only told Michael 5 minutes ago. I showed Ray the text. They're coordinating their information gathering. They're also probably monitoring your communications, Ray said. Mrs. Walsh, I don't think it's safe for you to have any contact with them until we figure out what we're dealing with. But they were my children. Despite everything I was discovering, despite the evidence of criminal activity and deception, they were still the babies I'd raised, the teenagers I'd worried about, the young adults I'd been so proud of. I need to talk to them first. I need to understand how this happened. Ray and Danny exchanged a look. Mrs. Walsh, people who run operations like this, they don't usually give up without a fight. Even family, especially family, Danny added quietly. Family knows your weaknesses. I thought about all the times Michael had shown up unannounced, claiming he was just checking on me. How Sarah always seemed to know when I'd been to the doctor, what I'd bought at the grocery store, who I'd talked to on the phone. I'd thought it was caring attention. Now I realized it was surveillance. How long do you think this has been going on? Ray was examining the installation more carefully. Based on the equipment and the quality of the construction, I'd say at least 2 years. Maybe longer. 2 years. That coincided with when Sarah had insisted on installing the new thermostat, and when Michael had started his regular check-in visits. They've been planning this for a long time, I said, more to myself than to Ray and Danny. Mrs. Walsh, Ray's voice was gentle but urgent. Whatever you decide to do, you can't go back to living in this house like nothing happened. They know you've discovered something by now. What do you mean? Think about it. You canceled lunch with Sarah. You're staying at your sister's again. Your behavior has changed, and if they're monitoring you as closely as it appears, they'll have noticed. As if to prove his point, my phone rang. Sarah, again. Hi, sweetheart. Mom, I'm really worried about you. You've been acting strange the last couple of days. Are you sure you're feeling okay? The concern in her voice sounded genuine, but now I couldn't tell what was real and what was manipulation. I'm fine, Sarah. Just tired from all the construction disruption. What kind of construction? I thought you were just having the bathroom remodeled. I hadn't mentioned bathrooms to her. I'd been carefully vague about what work was being done. Yes, the bathroom. It's messier than I expected. Well, why don't I come over and help you clean up? I don't have any plans tonight. That's sweet of you, but I'm not at the house right now. I know. You're at Aunt Janet's. But I could meet you there, or we could go back to your place together. The persistence was starting to feel threatening. Sarah, I appreciate the offer, but I really just need some quiet time tonight. After I hung up, Ray was shaking his head. She's pushing too hard. That's not normal concern. What do you think I should do? Honestly, I think you should pack a bag and disappear for a few days while the authorities figure this out. But running away felt like admitting defeat. These were my children, and despite everything I discovered, I still loved them. I still believe there might be an explanation that would make sense of all this. I'm going to talk to them. Both of them. Tomorrow. Mrs. Walsh, Ray, I appreciate everything you've done, but I need to handle this my way. He nodded reluctantly. At least let us seal this room back up temporarily. If they come looking, maybe they won't realize you've discovered it. That made sense. Ray and Danny worked quickly to replace the section of wall they'd cut out, using quick-drying concrete and matching paint to disguise the opening. To a casual observer, basement would look exactly as it had before. But I would never look at this space the same way again. After Ray and Danny left, I stood alone in my basement, listening to that electronic humming that I now knew was the sound of my children's criminal enterprise operating just feet away from where I did my laundry every week. Tomorrow, I would confront them. Tonight, I would try to figure out how to have that conversation without losing them forever. I drove back to Janet's house as the sun was setting, painting the October sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded me of better, simpler times. Times when my biggest worry was whether Michael was doing well in school or if Sarah was happy in her teaching job. Janet took one look at my face and poured us both generous glasses of wine without asking questions. That bad? Worse than I imagined. I sank into her living room couch and told her everything. The hidden room, the equipment, the evidence of financial crimes, the fake passports. Janet listened without interrupting, her expression growing more concerned with each detail. Eleanor, you have to call the police. I know, but I want to talk to them first. Honey, if they're involved in something this serious, confronting them could be dangerous. I'd been thinking the same thing all afternoon. They're my children, Janet. I raised them to be good people. There has to be an explanation. What explanation could possibly justify international money laundering and fake identities? I didn't have an answer for that. But I also couldn't reconcile the criminals I'd discovered today with the Michael and Sarah I thought I knew. Michael, who'd cried when our old dog died and spent his 16th birthday volunteering at a homeless shelter. Sarah, who'd chosen teaching because she wanted to make a difference in children's lives. Maybe they got in over their heads. Maybe they started with something small and it spiraled out of control. Janet refilled our wine glasses. Even if that's true, they've been lying to you for years. They've been using your house for illegal activities without your knowledge. That's not a mistake, Eleanor. That's deliberate deception. She was right, of course. But admitting that meant admitting that everything I thought I knew about my children was wrong. My phone buzzed with simultaneous texts from both Michael and Sarah. Michael, Mom, I'm really concerned about you. Can we talk tomorrow? Sarah, thinking of stopping by the house in the morning to check on things. Hope that's okay. The coordination was unmistakable. They were planning something. I showed the messages to Janet. They know I've discovered something. How could they know? Ray thinks they've been monitoring my communications. Maybe my location too. I thought about the smart thermostat, the doorbell camera, probably apps on my phone that I didn't even know were there. They've had years to set up surveillance. Janet was quiet for a moment. What if you don't go home tomorrow? What do you mean? What if you just disappear for a while? Come stay with me or go visit our cousin Martha in Maine. Let the authorities handle this without putting yourself at risk. The idea was tempting, but running away felt like abandoning the children I'd raised, even if those children had become strangers to me. I need to hear their side of the story. And if their side of the story involves threatening you to keep quiet, I didn't want to consider that possibility. But the evidence I'd seen today, the scale of the operation, the money involved, the fake identities suggested this wasn't a minor transgression that could be explained. Kay? We had a quiet dinner of leftover soup and salad, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Around 9 o'clock, my phone rang. Michael, Mom, I know it's late, but I've been worried about you all day. You haven't been acting like yourself? I'm fine, sweetheart. You sure? Because Sarah and I were talking, and we both noticed you've been different lately. More anxious, more secretive. The irony of being accused of secrecy by someone who'd been running a criminal enterprise from my basement was almost laughable. I'm not being secretive. I'm just dealing with some house issues. What kind of issues? Maybe I can help. Michael, I appreciate your concern, but I can handle it. There was a pause. Mom, are you angry with us about something? The directness of the question caught me off guard. Why would you think that? Because you're avoiding us. Canceling plans, not returning calls promptly, staying at Janet's instead of your own home. It feels like you're pulling away. I could hear genuine hurt in his voice, and for a moment, I almost wavered, almost convinced myself that there was an innocent explanation for everything I discovered. But then I remembered the bank statements, the fake passports, the sophisticated criminal infrastructure hidden in my basement. Can you and Sarah come over tomorrow afternoon? There's something important I need to discuss with both of you. Of course. What time? 2 o'clock. At the house. We'll be there. Mom, whatever's bothering you, we can work it out. We're family. After I hung up, Janet was looking at me with concern. Are you sure about this? No, but I have to try. That night, I lay awake in Janet's guest room, staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out what I would say to my children. How do you confront the people you love most in the world with evidence of their criminal activities? How do you ask your son and daughter if they're the strangers they appear to be? By morning, I still didn't have answers. But I had made a decision. I would meet with Michael and Sarah, but I wouldn't meet with them alone. I called Ray. I need you to be at the house tomorrow when I talk to my kids. Hidden, but close enough to help if things go wrong. Mrs. Walsh, I don't think, Ray, I'm going to do this with or without your help. But I'd rather do it with backup. He agreed reluctantly to position himself in the garage, where he could hear what was happening and intervene if necessary. I also called Tony Marcelli. After what he'd seen yesterday, he deserved to know what we'd discovered. And honestly, I needed all the allies I could get. Mrs. Walsh, I've been worried sick about you. Did you stay away from the house like I told you? I did. And Tony, you were right about everything. It's worse than we thought. I gave him a quick summary of what Ray and I had found. The hidden room, the evidence of financial crimes, the fake passports. Tony listened in silence, occasionally muttering Jesus or I knew it under his breath. Mrs. Walsh, you can't meet with them alone. Squizzing, I won't be alone. Ray's going to be there, and now you know what's happening too. That's not enough. You need the police. After I talk to them, I need to try to understand how my children became criminals. Tony was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Walsh, can I ask you something? Over the past couple years, have you noticed any changes in their behavior? New cars, expensive clothes, fancy vacations they couldn't afford on their salaries. I've thought about it. Michael's BMW, Sarah's trip to Italy last summer, Michael's new apartment with the river view. My voice got quieter as I realized how obvious it should have been. They always had explanations. Bonuses at work, good investments, teacher grants for professional development. And you believed them because you wanted to, because I'm their mother. The words came out sharper than I intended. Because children are supposed to be able to trust their parents, and parents are supposed to be able to trust their children. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to sound judgmental, but he was right. I had believed their explanations because questioning them meant questioning everything. I thought I knew about the people I'd raised. After I hung up with Tony, I spent the morning trying to prepare for the most difficult conversation of my life. How do you confront your children about criminal activity? How do you ask the people you love most if they've been using and deceiving you for years? Janet made lunch, but I couldn't eat. My stomach was tied in knots and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. It's not too late to change your mind, she said gently. Yes, it is. This has to happen. At 1:30, I drove back to my house. The October afternoon was crisp and beautiful, with maple leaves drifting down like golden snow. Under normal circumstances, it would have been the kind of day that makes you grateful to be alive. Instead, I felt like I was driving to my own execution. Ray was already waiting in my driveway when I arrived, his truck parked so it looked like he was doing work on the house. We'd agreed that he would hide in the garage with the door cracked open, close enough to hear everything but out of sight unless something went wrong. You sure about this, Mrs. Walsh? No, but I'm doing it anyway. I went into the house alone and waited. At exactly 2 o'clock, I heard 2 car doors slam in unison. Michael and Sarah had arrived together, which struck me as odd. They usually came separately to visit me through the front window. I watched them walk up the path together, their heads bent close in conversation. They looked like conspirators, and I suppose that's exactly what they were. The doorbell rang, even though they both had keys. Why were they announcing their presence instead of just coming in like they always did? Hi, Mom. Sarah gave me a hug that felt stiff, performed. How are you feeling today? Much better, thank you. I led them into the living room, my heart hammering against my ribs. Please, sit down. We need to talk. Michael loosened his tie and settled onto the couch next to Sarah. Both of them were watching me carefully, like they were trying to read my mood. Mom, you've had us really worried, Michael said. The past few days, you've been acting so distant, have I? I sat down across from them, trying to keep my voice steady. Maybe I've just been thinking about what? Sarah's voice had that therapist quality she sometimes used. like she was trying to gently extract information from a reluctant student about how well I really know my children. The words hung in the air between us. I watched their faces carefully, looking for reactions, for tells, for any sign of the guilt they should have been feeling. Michael frowned. What do you mean? I mean that yesterday I learned some things about this house that surprised me. Things about my basement specifically. Sarah's face went very still. What kind of things? Why don't you tell me? I kept my voice conversational, like we were discussing the weather. You both seem to know a lot about what goes on in my house, even when I don't tell you. Mom, I'm not following. But Michael's voice had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by something cooler, more calculating. The bathroom remodel, for instance. How did you both know about that when I never mentioned it to either of you? They exchanged a glance. Such a quick look that I almost missed it, but it was there. Silent communication, just like when they were children and had broken something they didn't want me to find. I thought you mentioned it, Sarah said. Maybe I misunderstood. Or maybe you have other ways of knowing what happens in my house. Another glance between them. This time, Michael was the one who spoke. Mom, what exactly are you accusing us of? The directness of the question caught me off guard, but I pressed on. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm asking you to explain why there's a room full of computer equipment hidden behind the wall in my basement. The change in the room was immediate and dramatic. Sarah went pale. Michael's jaw tightened. For several seconds, no one spoke. Finally, Michael leaned forward. Mom, I can explain. I'm listening. We were trying to protect you. His voice was calm, reasonable. The same tone he'd used as a teenager when he was caught doing something wrong. From the legal implications of what we were doing. What were you doing? Sarah jumped in. Michael made some bad investments at work. Lost money that belonged to clients. We were trying to make it back before anyone noticed. By running a criminal enterprise from my basement? It's not criminal, Michael said quickly. We were using cryptocurrency trading algorithms. Completely legal, just ... Complicated from a tax perspective. I pulled out my phone and showed them the photos Ray had taken of the documents we'd found. Bank statements, wire transfers, client lists. These don't look like tax complications to me. The mask finally slipped from Michael's face. The concerned son disappeared, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Someone harder, more calculating. How did you get those? Does it matter? Yes, it matters a lot. Michael stood up, and for the first time in my life, I felt afraid of my own son. Mom, you don't understand what you're dealing with. Then explain it to me. Sarah was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration of being caught. Mom, we never wanted you to get involved. We were protecting you by keeping you in the dark. It's protecting me. You've been using my house for money laundering. You've been monitoring my communications, tracking my movements, lying to me for years. How is any of that protecting me? Because if the authorities ever connected you to what we were doing, you could go to prison too, Michael said. As an accessory, the threat was subtle but unmistakable. They weren't just admitting their crimes, they were telling me I was complicit whether I knew it or not. Are you threatening me, Michael? I'm explaining reality to you. His voice was cold now, completely devoid of the warmth I associated with my son. We've all benefited from this arrangement. Your house is paid off because we've been covering the property taxes and maintenance. Your car, your medical bills, your living expenses, where do you think that money came from? I felt the room spinning around me. What are you talking about? Sarah wiped her eyes. Mom, your pension barely covers your basic expenses. We've been supplementing your income for 3 years. It's with stolen money. It's with money we earned. Michael corrected. The source is irrelevant. The source is everything. I stood up, my voice rising for the first time. You've made me an accessory to crimes I never knew were being committed. You've violated my home, my privacy, my trust. And now you're trying to make me feel grateful for it? Michael's expression hardened further. What exactly are you planning to do with this information, Mom? The question hung in the air like a threat. And I realized that this conversation had moved far beyond family drama into something much more dangerous. My children, these people I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, were essentially asking me to choose between them and doing the right thing. "I'm planning to call the police," I said quietly. Sarah gasped. "Mom, you can't. They'll arrest us." "You should be arrested. What you've done is illegal." Michael took a step closer to me, and I instinctively took a step back. "Mom, I don't think you understand the full scope of the situation." "Then explain it to me." "The people we work for, they don't take kindly to security breaches. If they think our cover has been blown because you decided to play detective, double quotes, he didn't finish the sentence." "Are you saying I'm in danger?" "I'm saying we're all in danger if you don't keep quiet about this." I looked at these two people, my son and daughter, my greatest accomplishments, the center of my world for 30 years, and saw strangers. Criminals who were willing to threaten their own mother to protect their illegal activities. "How long?" My voice came out as a whisper. "How long?" "What?" "How long have you been using my house? How long have you been lying to me? How long have you been criminals?" Sarah's tears started again. "Mom, it wasn't supposed to happen like this. Answer the question." Michael sat back down, suddenly looking tired. 3 years. Maybe a little longer. 3 years of lying to me. 3 years of protecting you from information that could hurt you. "And the people you work for? Who are they?" "You don't want to know. I want to know everything." Michael looked at Sarah and she nodded slightly. "International financial services. Offshore banking, cryptocurrency exchange, investment facilitation for clients who value privacy. Money laundering. That's a very narrow way to look at it." I felt like I was talking to pod people, alien beings who looked like my children but had none of their humanity. "Michael, Sarah, listen to yourselves. You're criminals. You're talking about international money laundering like it's a legitimate business." "It is legitimate in most of the world," Michael said. "American financial laws are draconian compared to other countries. We're just helping people navigate inconsistent international regulations with fake passports and hidden identities." Sarah looked surprised. "You found those too?" "I found everything. The whole setup, all the documents, all the evidence of what you've been doing." They exchanged another look, and this time the communication was longer, more complex. Finally, Michael spoke. "Mom, here's what's going to happen. You're going to forget everything you saw yesterday. You're going to go back to your normal routine. And in 6 months, when our current contracts are finished, we'll shut down the operation and move it somewhere else. And if I don't agree to that, then we'll have to consider other options." The threat was explicit now. My own children were threatening me. "I see." I kept my voice calm, even though my heart was racing. "And what exactly are these other options?" Sarah jumped in quickly. "Mom, Michael doesn't mean anything bad. We would never hurt you, but we could. Relocate you. Somewhere safe, comfortable, but away from all this." "Do you mean kidnap me?" "We mean protect you," Michael corrected, "from the consequences of decisions that aren't really yours to make." I looked around my living room, the same living room where I'd read bedtime stories to these people, where we'd opened Christmas presents, where they'd told me about their first jobs and their hopes for the future. Now it felt like a trap. "I need some time to think about this." "How much time?" Michael's voice was all business now. 24 hours. 12 hours, Sarah countered. "We need an answer by morning." As they got up to leave, Michael paused at the front door. "Mom, I want you to understand something. We love you. Everything we've done has been to protect and provide for you. But this situation is bigger than family loyalty now." After they left, I sat alone in my living room for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. My children had essentially given me an ultimatum. Keep quiet about their crimes or face the consequences. From the garage, I heard Ray's truck door slam. A moment later, he was knocking on my front door. "Mrs. Walsh, are you okay?" "No, I don't think I am." Ray had heard everything through the thin garage wall. "We need to call the FBI right now." They threatened me, Ray. My own children threatened me. Ha. No. I heard. His voice was grim. Mrs. Walsh, this isn't just about financial crime anymore. They're talking about kidnapping, about working for dangerous people. You're not safe here. I knew he was right. But knowing it and accepting it were two different things. What am I supposed to do? Turn in my own children. You're supposed to protect yourself. Because it's clear they're not going to. Ray helped me pack a bag, and we called the FBI from Janet's house. Special Agent Martinez arrived within 2 hours, along with a team of federal investigators who immediately secured my house as a crime scene. The next morning, while I was still at Janet's trying to process the fact that my children were about to be arrested, Agent Martinez called with an update. Mrs. Walsh, your house is empty. The equipment has been removed and there's no sign of your son or daughter. They were gone. My children had disappeared in the night, leaving behind only the shell of the family I thought I knew. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my kitchen, the same kitchen where this whole nightmare had started, drinking coffee and watching the November morning light filter through windows that no longer felt like home. The FBI had finished processing the crime scene. The hidden room in my basement had been completely gutted, leaving behind only concrete walls and the lingering smell of electronic equipment. Agent Martinez had explained that Michael and Sarah were part of a larger international money laundering operation, one that had been moving hundreds of millions of dollars through networks of unwitting accomplices and corrupt financial institutions. They'd used at least a dozen houses, like mine, across New England, setting up sophisticated computer operations in basements and spare rooms, often without the homeowner's knowledge. In some cases, like mine, they'd recruited family members through a combination of deception and financial dependency. In other cases, they'd simply rented properties and told landlords they worked in technology consulting. Your children were middle management in this organization, Agent Martinez had told me. Important enough to have significant autonomy, but not important enough to know the full scope of the operation. That should have made me feel better somehow, knowing they weren't the masterminds. It didn't. Tony Marcelli had stopped by the previous week to check on me and to finish the bathroom renovation we'd started a month ago. It seemed almost absurd to worry about avocado green tiles when my entire understanding of my family had been destroyed. But the routine of normal life was helping me cope with the surreal nature of everything else. Mrs. Walsh, you did the right thing, he'd said while installing the new vanity. I know it doesn't feel like it now, but you did the right thing. I wasn't sure I believed him. Doing the right thing shouldn't leave you feeling like you'd lost everything that mattered. Janet had been staying with me most evenings, helping me sort through the emotional wreckage while we waited for news from the FBI. So far, there had been no sign of Michael or Sarah. Agent Martinez thought they'd probably left the country using their fake identities, but she warned me that it could be months or years before they were located. It's the hardest part. I told Janet one evening over wine and takeout Chinese food, is that I don't know who they really were. Were they my children who became criminals? Or were they criminals who were pretending to be my children? Maybe they were both, Janet had replied. Maybe the people you raised were real, but they made choices that changed them into someone else. I'd been thinking about that conversation while I sat in my newly renovated bathroom this morning, looking at tiles that were a warm, cheerful yellow instead of that awful avocado green. The bathroom looked completely different now, but it was still the same room. The bones were the same, even if everything else had changed. Maybe that was true about Michael and Sarah, too. Maybe the children I'd raised were still there somewhere, buried under layers of bad choices and criminal behavior. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mom, we're safe. We're sorry for everything. Someday, maybe we can explain. We love you. I stared at the message for a long time before showing it to Janet, who'd come over to help me organize the basement storage that was no longer contaminated by criminal equipment. Are you going to respond? She asked. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to text back immediately, to tell them I loved them too, to ask where they were and if they were okay. But a larger part of me knew that any contact with them could put me in danger and might interfere with the FBI investigation. No, I said finally. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I'm proud of you. I don't feel proud. I feel like I failed them somehow. Eleanor, you didn't make them into criminals. They chose that path themselves. I knew she was right intellectually, but emotionally, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd missed something crucial in their development. Some moment when they decided that money was more important than honesty. That success was more important than integrity. Agent Martinez had told me that the investigation would probably take years to fully resolve, and that there was a good chance Michael and Sarah would never be brought to justice. The international nature of the crimes and their apparent resources for staying hidden made them difficult targets for law enforcement. But Mrs. Walsh, she'd added, you should know that your cooperation has helped us shut down a significant criminal enterprise. The information we gathered from your house has led to arrests in 3 other states and 2 other countries. You've prevented a lot of people from being victimized. That was something I supposed, even if I couldn't save my children from themselves. Maybe I'd saved other people's children from becoming victims. As I sat in my kitchen that November morning, I realized that I was gradually becoming okay with uncertainty. I might never know exactly who Michael and Sarah really were. I might never understand how the babies I'd rocked to sleep became the criminals who'd threatened me in my own living room. But I was learning to live with questions that didn't have answers. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Ray Kowalski, carrying a toolbox and wearing a gentle smile. Morning, Mrs. Walsh. I know you didn't call for any work, but I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd check on you. It's very kind. Ray, come in, I'll make coffee. As we sat in my kitchen, talking about the weather and his other jobs and anything except basements and criminal investigations, I realized that some relationships survive even the worst revelations. Ray had seen me at my most vulnerable and confused, and he was still here, still treating me with the same respect and kindness he'd always shown. Maybe that was enough. Maybe learning to distinguish between people who would stand by you and people who would use you was one of the most important lessons life could teach. Outside my kitchen window, the last of the autumn leaves were falling from the maple tree, making room for winter. Soon there would be snow, and then spring, and then another summer. Life would continue. With or without the people I'd thought were permanent fixtures in it for the first time in weeks. That thought didn't terrify me. It just seemed like the natural order of things. I finished my coffee, put on my coat, and drove to Stop and Shop to buy ingredients for Thanksgiving dinner. Janet and I had decided to host a small gathering for friends and neighbors who, like me, were building new definitions of family based on choice rather than blood. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was the life I had. And as I walked through the grocery store, picking out cranberries and sweet potatoes and everything else that makes a proper New England Thanksgiving, I realized that might be enough.